was asked to do a TED Talk in 2017. Then after about 50 drafts, it was about 1 month to go. And I remember we were asked to practice our draft with some other people. And the feedback after I did this last draft was, I don't understand what you're talking about. Now, the background of my TED Talk is that I'm a lawyer and I was there as a rebel and describing how we'd reimagine our approach to the law and innovation. And I guess what had happened over the 50 drafts is that I'd sort of lost my way a little bit, and it became more and more data-driven and less about me. So at that point, it was a Friday and I completely freaked out. And I went home and I said to my husband, I'm not sure I've got this in me. I've never felt like this before. I thought I loved to do public speaking, but I don't think I can do this. And so that weekend, I had been asked to go and meet someone for a coffee on the Monday morning. And so I met them and we were just talking about things, and they said, at the end, they said, of the conversation, they said, and how are you? And I said, I'm terrible, thanks, because I've been asked to do a TED Talk. I've got basically a month to go, and I'm lost. And so she looked at me and she said, I think you need someone called Yamini. Yamini Naidu.
Oh, Lisa, that's so wonderful. I remember for me, I got an email which was sent at 4:45 a.m. on Saturday morning. And as soon as I saw the time on the email, I went, my God, this person's obviously in a crisis. And I read it, and Lisa was just saying she was doing a TED Talk and she was just reaching out. And normally I actually don't look at my emails or I don't respond, but this was so urgent and was such a sincere appeal that I immediately responded to her and said, let's meet first thing Monday and let's see what we can do to help you, because I just wanted her to just have a reasonable weekend. What I love about you, Lisa, is your level of self-awareness and your honesty, because as a seasoned professional who's very good at what you do, it's always disturbing for us when we come across a crisis or a challenge where we think, what's happening? I can't do this. Like, I'm so good at what I do. I'm technically fabulous. Clients give me that feedback all the time. And suddenly here I am trying to design a TED Talk and I've come unstuck. I think what happens for a lot of technical experts is we're very close to our material. So it's very hard to step back and prioritize. So we tend to want to put everything in. And I just recently had a personal experience, which I might share later in the video, around this. So I think just sometimes reaching out for help. And I do that too. I recently worked with a humor coach called Kate Bell, and she was just brilliant. So it's just having that moment of saying, I need someone else who can just coach me through this process. But having some really good, robust content and some strong messages. So for you, you had a lot of conviction around what you were saying, and you had a lot of depth. So it wasn't something you were just like, you weren't jumping on a bandwagon, or it wasn't just embracing a trend and being superficial with it.
Can I describe also how I was feeling at the time? So there was a lot of pressure that I was feeling building as it was coming up to this TED Talk.
Sure.
And I was feeling extremely vulnerable and unsure of myself. And the one thing that you really gave me in your email response is, first of all, you said, I don't usually respond on the weekend, but this is a TEDx emergency.
You remember the words, yeah.
And then you said, I know what we're going to do. This is the plan. This is what it's going to take.
Yeah.
Don't worry, we will get you there. We've got 1 month, we'll nail it.
Yeah. Cool.
And suddenly I felt like you were sharing my burden, because like I had my husband on board, I had my business partner on board, and they took me as far as they could take me, and they were just extremely helpful, and so was John. But I think I had just burrowed after 50 versions of this thing, and the pressure on an idea worth spreading was sort of beyond me. Yeah. So I think, first of all, sharing the burden with people was, it just made me feel already going into that with a positive attitude of, I now know that I can do it because somebody is on my side and they're going to help me get there.
Sure. Wow. I'm just overwhelmed. I know. And that was the point also when I invited Sandy into the coaching, because, and Lisa, when you came in, I was so impressed. Remember, you used to carry this big, the rolled up poster, and it had a special case, which was all the work. Lisa had done so much work with the post-it notes, the meta-narrative, the little detail. So we could literally visually see the work. And that was incredible. Just to go, a bit of a sidetrack, I recently, some of you might know, been studying stand-up comedy. And we had the pleasure of listening to Dave O'Neill. So he came in to give us some advice. And we said, how do you explain the overnight success of some comedians? That was one of the questions people asked him. And he said, it really comes down to doing the work. He said, you've got to do the work. He also said, be consistent and be nice to people. But in this particular instance, for me, it always starts with, you've got to do the work. And you had actually done the work. This was also the time when I decided to invite Sandy in, because Sandy brings particular expertise around languaging and around finding, the right ways in which we can connect with people using sensory data.
Well, first of all, I was just so excited to be involved, because having done a TEDx talk myself, I knew and understood the amount of pressure on you and the vulnerability you feel, which I think we were talking before the video, and that was one of the things that you said, a huge sense of pressure and vulnerability. It's not the same as speaking professionally. You're putting yourself out there in a very, very different way with a TEDx talk. So I first of all had a huge amount of empathy for the way in which you felt. And secondly, I was very excited to be able to actually take the level of work you'd done and help you declutter it. So some of the work that I do is around clarity, and I often talk to people about multiple possibility disorder, and that's what happens when you've got a huge amount of expertise to share with the world. You struggle with a bunch of competing messages, and you've only got 15 minutes or less to get a lot across. In this case, it's a lifetime story. And so how do you structure and organize a talk so that the absolutely key messages are involved to get to the point where the purpose for the talk, the idea worth sharing, is shared in a way that makes sense to the audience? And so there was so much to work with, and it was a case of taking that massive, great big poster and refining and pulling down those beautiful key messages, and then wrapping story around them. And you had quite a lot of story, but it was finding those really profound stories that would demonstrate to the audience exactly why that idea was worth sharing. And so being involved in that, and then becoming very forensic around the language, and looking at exactly how things were paced.
So here's an example of before and after. We had a reference to Eminem, and then I said, something in me broke, and I took that next logical step to leave law. I became a radio DJ.
And you went to?
Something in me broke. I left the law. One moment, I was the Asian parent's dream. The next, I was booming my voice across regional radio as a DJ.
Lisa's actually using a couple of quite sophisticated techniques in there. She's using a lot of sensory data, so she's painting the picture. So there's that contrast, but she's also raising the stakes. So one minute she was in the law, and the next minute you couldn't think of anything that was the more the polar opposite, which is being a radio DJ booming your voice across Asia. And then in that mix is the shattered Asian parent's dream. So in that one sentence, it's very heartwarming. It's got the, oh my God, how did you do that moment? It also packs in much more than just the surface level content. But I just want to go back a step we could only get to that level of forensic detail by taking a step back. And Lisa was really clear when she came to us. You already had a title for your talk. What was your title, Lisa?
Can robots make us more human?
Can robots make us more human? So that she had the overarching key message for her talk. And I think for me, that's about 50% of your work right there. Because the minute you ask people, Sandy, they say, oh, it's about this, but it's also about this and it's about that. And then you just get that whole diluted effect. Yeah.
But you know that title, it was a gift and a threat in
Yeah,
itself
that's
because
right,
it's
that's
such a great title. John Yo came up with the title
yeah.
when we were riffing.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, it's perfect. And
I love
yet
it.
it's so big
know.
as a concept that in itself
Sure.
kept me up at nights, I think. Just thinking,
Yeah,
is my talk good enough for this title?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah, no, it is. You're right.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to add something to what you were saying, Yamini, about the sensory data. What those sentences did was actually create what I call a micro story.
Yeah.
And it had all the components of the classic story arc in there, because there was the spark, something in me broke. There was the taking you on a journey, the fact that journey shift from one place to another. It defied expectations. There was the key decision to leave the law, to become a DJ. So it actually, all the classic story arc just in those 3 sentences. And that's high impact and really great storytelling just there. And I think that's also the power of the forensic approach to language, because you kind of have to make every sentence work. Every word in the sentence needs to have a place.
Yeah. But Lisa, to go back, so really we were thinking it was 3 parts. It was first, what was wrong with my current life, job, and all of that. What I did differently, and then how I had that moment where I went, this is what I can teach other lawyers. How would you describe that meta narrative? So what was the first thing you did in your talk? What was that?
And so this was something that really stood out for me. So I'd mentioned that I'd got to the stage in the 50th draft where it was all about the data and the facts, and then I'd lost myself in there. And so the night before I saw Yamini, I'd actually put back some of myself back into the speech. I just kind of shoved it in there. And it started off by me saying, really, I'm a lawyer, I was a lawyer, but I was always a bit different. And so Yamini said, oh, how are you a bit different? And I said, well, I used to do some singing, I used to do some rapping on these meetings, it was all really a bit weird. And Yamini looked at me and she said, do you know what, I don't want you to talk about rapping. I want you to rap. And I went, okay. Because surprisingly, it actually made me more comfortable getting on that stage and doing a rap, because it is something that I like doing.
It's being who you are, being authentic.
And so I know there's a bit of theory behind this as well,
It's the idea of, like, in a talk, so you don't just tell people, you try and show people. Yeah. And I think rapping or dancing or poetry, actually showing the audience. So wherever you can, your words paint a picture, create a sensory experience. But in this instance, there was such a joy. And it's also unlocking you as a speaker. And you saw the audience response on the day that was so unexpected. And there was just like this roar. And that just lifted the rest of your talk up. So people love those moments of authenticity where you go, And I think you didn't even say, you just literally did a rap. You rapped it out.
An amazing piece of work done by Microsoft. I don't know if any of you have come across that survey, but they were looking at how we're dealing with the deluge of incoming information. And there are 4 points in the survey around how to grab attention and hold attention, which is what we've got to do with our talks. I mean, in a 16-minute talk, you have to hold attention. Was, apart from being very clear and relevant and succinct in terms of what the purpose of your talk is to defy expectations, which you did with the rap, and to create an immersive audience experience. And that's exactly what you did. And managed to do all the way through. So that rap came quite early on, and that just grabbed and held attention, and that allowed you to then deliver the talk and the rest of the messages.
Unless you get that meta story right, so always start there. Yeah. Say what happened, or what was the current, what was the beginning, what needed to change, and why, and how it changed. If you think of 3 big buckets, most talks can fit into that. And once you've got that right, it's like building a house. Once you've got the plans, then everything you do, you can showcase the points you're trying to make. So everything we do, if you just did that at a meta level, you'd end up with a very dry, intellectual talk that wouldn't resonate with an audience. And then it's thinking, what can I bring that makes it uniquely mine? So how am I going to take it just as a piece of information and infuse it with emotion, with connection, with laughter. And then that's when you apply all the tools, like both Sandy and I do storytelling, and you apply humor. But you also then unlock individuality. So I hate to suggest all of these are tools and techniques, but I still think there's nuance and there's artistry around how you can apply them to magnify your best strengths. But the other thing I must say, both Sandy and I just said it was such a joy to work with you, Lisa. And I'm not just saying this because it's recorded on video. Okay, I am now. But because you were so open. You were just like ready to try everything. You know, you didn't just you didn't dismiss things and go, oh God, I couldn't, you know? You said, let's give it a go. And then we refined it, or we even didn't do it. Didn't do some of those
I was quite desperate.
No, desperate person will try anything. But sometimes when people are desperate, that's when you revert back to what you know best.
Yeah. And
you get...
so just thinking about how you both worked together. So I loved that you called Sandy in.
Yeah.
Like,
I just
I think that was a very
the clarity and
amazing thing to do is to say, you know what, I think we really need Sandy here. And then seeing you both work together did create a really safe environment for me, because I felt like there was a lot of the colour and the humour and the stories that you really brought out. For me, Yamini, and having Sandy there sort of interrogating our words and pushing us
language,
and the structure. And I think, so Sandy sort of took control of the structure and then the scripting and really sort of just kept on making sure that it all worked. And then together we built the stories and helped each other. So it just felt really collaborative, and I think it was definitely
co-creating.
That felt really empowering.
And I think
we
were also sleeping and waking up to Lisa's words in our head. It is like one of those music worms where it just goes into your head and you think that one word.
Yes.
I also think all of this is always about progress, isn't it? Each time you can come back and say, here's a word I can change, here's a word I can tweak. But then also at a certain point just saying, that's it, don't make any more changes, because it was a TED Talk.
Yes.
We had to just go, that's it. You have to be disciplined as well.
Yes.
So this continuous tweaking, artistry, refining, improving, and then calling it, drawing a line in the sand.
There's a moment at which John Yo, who's the TEDx convener, said it's a moment at which you almost begin to get bored, because it's at that point that you can really start to play.
Correct.
And so you're absolutely right, Yamini. There comes a point at which you say, okay, we've got it. This is now it. Now we need to start rehearsing and practicing it, because it's actually in the practicing of it that you began to see certain parts at which you had to change and refine. And it's incredible how the nuances of words really matter. And the way in which they're said and how they make sense of the sentence before and the sentence after. And that can only be done when you're beginning to perform. And you can only perform or begin to practice performing when you've got a script that's worthwhile performing.
And Sandy, no actor can rise above their script. Even comedy, as soon as we walked into comedy, they said all comedy starts by writing. And you could have heard dead silence in the room because we were all ready to come in and just start riffing and being really funny. And it's the same applies with presenting. If you want to be good as a presenter, it actually starts with that discipline of scripting, writing. You want to add to that. Were you surprised by that, Lisa?
I'd love to talk about going with the script because I have done a lot of presentations of a much smaller scale and loved it and never used a script, and in fact I thought that it would make me sound very artificial by having a
dumb
script.
You down. It would restrain your
artistry.
artistry.
With a TED Talk, you have got 10 minutes. You pretty much have to have a script because you don't have time to waste words at all. So I went with the script, and that was harder for me, but in the end it was absolutely worthwhile, because if every word counts, you do need to nuance and think about your message and absolutely clarify it. So I would pretty much say that with any talk, especially short ones like 10 minutes, you should probably start with a script so that you're really testing, well, what am I trying to say here? What's the clarity? And then stop it early, because even though our early was probably only 2 or 3 days because of my tight time frame, you need to stop it early because you need to just get it into your body. And be able to remember the words. And then what we did after we finished working on the script was then how are you saying it, and just practicing it out loud with people listening and saying that doesn't sound right, and then stagecraft, which helped me enormously, because also when you're nervous at the time, you will revert to either pacing or standing really still. So, and because I'm a pacer and I'm an arms person, I would have just been, one of those kind of things that you have in front of the petrol stations. So for me, it was really important to have a little bit of thinking, and I'm hoping it didn't come across to stage, but at least knowing, what are you going to do when you're completely petrified.
It's really interesting with the TED Talk, I would say, and I think John has 2 schools where you either script every word or you go with it on the day. And I think most people don't leave it a chance with a TED Talk. But I think with the speakers I work with, I definitely like you to definitely script your beginning. Because that's when nerves kick in, and beginnings are always decision diamonds for your audience. That's when they're deciding we're going to lean in and listen or not. And you have to have a power beginning, and the only way you get that, and seasoned speakers will tell you, is by writing it, practicing it, and owning it, which is what you did, Lisa. I don't mind the middle being a little bit organic. I worry because we all can waffle much more than we think we actually do. So I just think it's very respectful to do some work and do some thinking and crafting before you stand up to do any presentation. And I'd always talk about writing down your ending. And it can't be the end.
And it can't start with, I'm going to tell you a story.
Oh, please. That's so amateur. And then we brought in some stories and humour.
Yes.
How do you segue in and out of stories? And how do you make the story resonate?
Oh, that's such a valuable point to discuss, I think. Because I do believe that when you talk to people about doing a talk and involving stories, I think a lot of people think that they've literally, they've got to start with, well, I'm going to tell you a story now, and I've moved out of the story, and I'm going to go back to the data or the insights, and it's nothing like that. I think even the small example that we showed proves that what I call micro stories, which are painting the pictures with words, can happen in a totally seamless way. Very often stories carry the impacts, I think. You do want to get a number of powerful impacts in a talk. Not too many, otherwise you leave your audience not too few, otherwise they'll be asleep.
You need that contrast. You can't be high pitch. I don't like one volume all the way.
No, it's got to have a cadence.
A cadence.
A lot of this is about cadence as well, and stories fit into that cadence. Yes, when I did the TEDx talk, one of the things that I learned was I had a number of ideas that these were the key messages that I needed to get across to get to my idea worth sharing. And I had a big story in there to tell, but within that story there were a whole lot of mini stories. So I looked at the structure of it as a series of vignettes. And I'd learned quite a lot about the structure of good talks from watching TEDx talks. And one of them was this notion that a great talk picks up a central idea, builds it up to a central point, and then falls away to bring it to start up the next idea. And that each of these sort of can stand on their own merits. And I think the measure of a great talk is how you segue from one vignette to the next. And each vignette contains an idea. And it may even be an open loop idea. In other words, you don't complete the idea, but you come back at the end and pull it all together. The comedians do that a lot, don't they?
They do that a lot. And that's again a very sophisticated, a level up.
It is a level up. But I think it's a really important thing to consider when you're doing a talk, and especially a TEDx talk, because we respond to cadence. It's like poetry or music. We respond to the rhythm of a talk and the rhythm of a voice. And you got cadence in your talk because there were these different rhythms happening. There was the rap at the beginning, and then we moved to something a bit more serious, and then there was this flow. So I think cadence is something that's very important to consider actually in the scripting of the talk and then in the performance of the talk. What do you think?
Yeah. I actually heard a talk the other day and I realized now it had no cadence. It was all that one impact, and that is so debilitating for an audience because you can't put your finger on why it didn't work, but this immediately unlocked why it didn't work for me. Yeah.
Working with people, and I think I did this with you too, Lisa, was that idea of almost putting each idea on its own page.
Correct.
Just to sort of mentally, because very often you see somebody's script and it's just, jam, take 2 pages, ooh, and there's several ideas in it. If you break those ideas out and put them literally on their own page, you get done. You can see the cadence within the idea. Are you taking people on a journey? Are you building them up to a point and then falling away to pick up the next one? Do you know my classic example of this is I love Lord of the Rings. It's like one of my favorite books. I read it when I was
Me too, yeah.
Although I so applaud the movies and I thought they were amazing, one of the problems with the movies is they were trying to condense those books into, a 3-hour movie. And there was no place to rest. In the book, you got to rest in Lothlorien and catch your breath before you were off on the next part of the journey.
Yes.
But in the movie, it was just like bang, 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 bang. I came out feeling like I'd been stretched on a rack.
Yeah.
And, you can't do that to your audience.
In the script, we've put in things like pause.
Yes.
Remember that? And
Lisa was a model student, can I say?
She was fabulous.
So there was pauses, and then there were times when I could be quite laborious because the way in which I speak, it's just sort of became a certain rhythm, and so you actually sort of said, no, you need to actually stand still and run this all together much quicker. So the speed as well. So because I think people think of tone maybe, but certainly you don't think about the speed, and most people speak at the same speed. And so just having something run a little bit faster, making a point very still, as opposed to, okay, I'm about to tell you something a little bit deeper and therefore I will pace it a bit slower for effect. But if you're doing that all the time, I think people would just be like,
hurry up.
and you're like, you're labouring the point, which of course you get as well. So, and they're having that all laid out in the script, and I did notice that you took a page for a point, and it was brilliant.
Yeah,
and so then I memorised it that way. So, talking about memorising, I remember definitely knowing visually where each page was going, which each point. And then what I learnt was, how does this page or this concept start? How does it finish? And how does that last bit link in with the next point? Because when your heart's beating fast, the bit that I was losing in the dress rehearsal where I forgot most of my speech was the link between one idea and the next. So then I just practiced the links.
Classic piece of...
But it's also such a gift for your audience, because this is a key way in which presentations differ from, say, if your audience was reading something from a book. Because if I'm reading, I can go back. But when I'm speaking, all I've got is you to keep me anchored. And of course, we try to use minimal slides with you. In fact, I think we did no slides.
Yes.
So it was purely Lisa anchoring her content, taking us through, so her narrative to be really clear. But just to come back to a couple of things you've said before, and this is what we don't do enough in business, is using that pacing.
Yes.
Using pausing. So just did a dramatic pause there to make the point.
Nice.
And just bearing your tone, going really high and going, which we do normally in conversations. If you're angry or you're excited, you're talking really fast. And if you're really, content and you're thinking about something, you're going really slow. And I think we don't play enough with all of that. And there's so much richness.
Yes.
So you were talking earlier, Sandy, about the Microsoft thing, about creating an immersive experience. And these are some of the tools, including some of the non-verbals, which we gave you to do, where you're using your body and you're using your hands and, making points, but not being... We've seen examples, Lisa, where people have been overly dramatic with the...
Talking about you walking into the centre of the stage at the point at which you were to make the most profound point of your whole talk. And you came into centre stage and looked at the audience. I think everybody would have felt that you were looking directly at them. And you slowed right down and you made that powerful point straight into the lens of the audience, and that's such a key thing to do. And people miss that opportunity because they're so busy walking from one side of the stage to the other and flinging their arms around and their heads around, and they miss that opportunity to actually bring the gravitas in at where it needs to be brought in.
Sure.
And then you can contrast that and lighten
Yeah.
it or deepen it,
Yeah.
you know. And you did that so well.
So well,
she was a
so.
fantastic student.
But Sandy, you also earlier introduced a very sophisticated idea, which is the idea of open loop.
Yes.
So do you want to talk a little bit? And did Lisa's talk have some open loops?
Yes, I felt like you had some open loops because...
Have I closed them yet?
Yeah.
yeah, you did.
Only asking a year later. That audience is still wondering.
What you want your audience to do, it's not so much that you've left them hanging dry,
Yeah.
because I think if it's done well, they almost innately know that you're going to come back and close it. But it's very much a means by which you're continuing to hold the attention, because now people want to know, how does that fit in to this overall story? So how does being a rapping lawyer fit into the whole concept of humanizing lawyers? How does changing technology sit with being a rapping lawyer?
And being ready for artificial intelligence.
Exactly.
Where does it all work?
Yeah. And so you're pulling all these threads together and joining them all up at the end into the idea worth sharing. And I think when I did my TEDx talk, I told a story about my father as a bomber pilot right at the beginning, and then went on to the central story that had nothing whatsoever to do with my dad. But I brought it back at the end in terms of the stories that my dad had to share around resilience. So that's how I wrapped that piece up. And it just, it's not, there's nothing, if it's contrived, it won't work.
Correct.
It has to be authentic. It has to come from,
Yeah.
it's very much, and this is where personal stories work.
Yeah.
And what you told was a very personal story, and that's why it worked so well.
So I think there's that old formula, tell them what you've told them, tell them again. And tell them tell them you've told them.
Yes.
I just find that so
It's
disrespectful.
Yeah.
It's so patronizing, and it just leaves you very bored, because I think if there's one thing audiences are as human beings, we're lean, mean guessing machines. So we're always like 3 steps ahead. So we already know what you're going to say. We lose interest. We're just not invested.
Yeah.
I think what the open loop story does is it guards you against the biggest mistake presenters can make, which is telling you everything you need to know. They tell you this is going to be a talk about when I followed my dream, you know, and then bang, everyone's just like, it's like deflated, like the air has left a balloon. So I think the open loop keeps a level of intrigue, and this is good intrigue, not bad corporate intrigue. This is good intrigue. It just keeps the audience invested and going with you, curious.
Yeah.
Another thing that Yamini and Sandy really helped with on that note was just looking out for words which are very boring. Like, I think at one point I said I followed my passion.
Oh, cliches. You said, no,
so cliches,
Yeah,
and so there was a cliche strike.
What did you use instead, Lisa? Did we just completely take it out?
So we completely took out follow my passion, and we went back to the moment, which was a Monday morning in an airless room and hearing the voice of a famous philosopher, Eminem. So it was, playing with the rapping, so Eminem spoke
and defying expectations.
Yeah,
People
so
were
instead of
thinking,
following passion, it was following Eminem's advice. So the story was there. So the story was the same, but you helped me really find a different way to engage the audience in the story. And, that is how I was feeling in that windowless room, but instead I think through time I just sort of changed it to dumb it down in a way, and so it lost its power, whereas you took me back to the moment, and so I needed to take people with me to that moment, which you've sort of forgotten about. So that was kind of where the power was.
And what Lisa did then is dropping your audience straight into the emotion.
Yes.
So when you're using a cliche like following my dream, you're actually hiding behind that cliche, and you're not being as vulnerable and honest as you can be. But the minute you talk about darkened office, something broke, your audience is immediately respectful of your experience. Because you've dropped them into this darkened emotion, and we've all felt that. We've all had similar, so it's very relatable.
That's actually where the science of narrative comes in, because all the research has showed that the moment you use emotionally charged, character-driven story, which that was, because we were in that windowless, airless office with you on a Monday morning. We could feel that sort of depth of despair in the pit of your stomach, like, is this really all that life is about? And that, something in you broke. We could feel that. So it was emotionally charged, and it was character-driven because it was you. And so the audience then has actually, the science shows that you have a massive spike of oxytocin, which is the neurochemical responsible for empathy.
And they're
so
heavily invested, no?
Yeah.
So when they get that
so they
spike,
become
they
empathetic.
yeah.
And at that moment, they're with you. They're going on the journey with you. So if you don't do that, you're not going to pull in that audience empathy. You're not going to hold their attention, keep them. Because the other thing is cortisol also happens at that time. That focuses attention, which are the two things you need.
Yeah.
So stories are so powerful, and that was a story. Just that sentence was a story because we were all there.
So there's got to be a bit of rawness, and it's got to land on message. I think it's got to be relatable. So sometimes people try to reverse it. They think, I've got a great story, I'm going to design a TikTok around it. And that just looks contrived. And I think John is very good at spotting stuff like that, where, people are trying to put the horse before the cart. So I think there was real rawness in finding the right story that would help people get your message.
And we spoke about expertise sometimes getting in the way of communicating your message. And so for me, another powerful part was I'd mentioned that it had turned into a lot of data because there was a lot to try and communicate. So what we did instead was we did take a story, and it was a real story of a person who was affected by the work that we were doing to rehumanise business. So this doubling down on being human, we actually took one person, we told that story.
Correct.
And that exhibited the data. And then that was the open loop, which at the end we could show, because the initial reaction of the person was actually, this is a threat. I don't like this change that's happening. So I could show that, we're not all going to welcome artificial intelligence. So what are we going to do about that? And how can we work with it? So then we explained what happened, which is empathy interviewing. And then we could go back to the story again, to that person and how they were personally affected by it. So that's the way, and we got away from the data, and we managed to craft something which helped me communicate the change without me talking about stats, because I think at one point I was talking about number of contracts and 50,000 hours saved. That was another Yamini moment.
And people always struggle with how can we do data well in a presentation, because obviously the data is important. Because most of our audiences, business audiences, linear, logical, analytical, is like, show me the data. I think show me the data today's changed to tell me the story.
Yes.
Very much so. What Lisa's saying, you almost need to think of it, this is two sequences. So if you think of a DNA sequence, so you've always got the individual story, because that is what is relatable. And then you've got to show what your methodology or whatever your message is doing, and that might include some level of data woven in throughout that. But it's the individual stories that resonate and make it all pop. And without that, if you just try to do, it's like having one DNA sequence, it's just not going to work. And again, it's in thinking, how could I do data well, which is the hard bits. You could do one big data point and then follow that up with a story, but never put data into your story, because if you've ever done a load of washing of whites and there's been one red sock in it, that is what data does to your story. It destroys it.
So I did want to lift the curtain on the TED Talk, and all you see when you lift the curtain is a lot of tears.
But past the veil of tears.
There is a lot of vulnerability with getting out on the stage, whether it be a TED Talk or any stage or any presentation. And when people see the confident, polished version, I think they forget the amount of hard work and teamwork that goes into creating a confident talk. And so I guess I wanted to draw attention to the fact that there was a moment where I thought, I don't have this in me, and I really had to dig deep. It was probably the hardest thing I've ever done. I've certainly worked on it for about 9 months before the point in time that I saw Yamini and Sandy, and had, created something which was okay. It was an okay talk, but it didn't quite hit the mark. And so I guess it's within you, and you can do this, and it's really about that idea of trying to unpack and declutter all that expertise and all the hundreds of ideas you want. You really need to be very clear about your message, and it's always useful to ask professionals to help.
Brilliant. Lovely last words. Thank you.
I think it's an incredible privilege to be involved in somebody doing a TEDx talk, particularly a TEDx talk. It's a privilege to work with anybody telling a story of some sort. But a TEDx talk is particularly special. The whole notion of a TEDx talk is that you're going to share an idea that might change somebody's life or enrich their life or even save lives. And so to have that insight into a talk and to have some influence perhaps in how it might roll out and be as the most powerful version of itself is a wonderful privilege. And I was very grateful to you, Lisa. Thank you so much. And to you, Yamini, for involving me. But I'd like to finish on the note that you all have a TEDx talk in you.
Yes. Ta-da!
Everybody has stories to tell that can change and save and enrich lives. So bring your TEDx talk forward, people.